Yep, full 15 minutes for setup. Hey, actually we can see you in your bed. That's awesome. All right, well, we're waiting. Otherwise, it might be a one-on-one tutorial. We arranged this time for our general academic PEDS fellows. They have like a standing Thursday afternoon session, but they're in classes for the first month. So anyway, it's funny because we picked the time for them, but they actually can't come.
Well, I'll take it. It works out for me, so that's okay.
Yeah, it does work out for you. Do you just see the screen? You don't see us, right?
I don't see you, I just see the screen.
But it looks like it's set up to. It says camera.
Yeah, it could film us.
All right, it's 3:01. I'm gonna get going. Hey, Rupal, did you see where I plotted your study design?
I did. I think that's about right for where I put it. I don't know where you actually see it, but that's about right for where I put it.
Oh, there's Kelly. Hey, Kelly. Hey, Kelly.
Yes, hey.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Good. It's just you, me, and Rupal and Haley. All the GAP fellows are off at an all-day conference today, so they're not joining.
Okay.
So it's very few people right now, but I thought that while people might be trickling in, we could just go over for you and Rupal how you thought this plotting exercise went. I think what I was trying to say back to you is if I circled your initials, then I thought you had done the appropriate job, like plotting out where you were on just this two-dimensional graph. But I was wondering what you thought when you saw it back.
Oh, I think that looks right. I think that's what I said.
Yeah.
And I was gratified to see my initials circled. That's
Yes, exactly. Same for Rupal. Although she has a little bit more of a bigger study population, and she's going for a stronger study design. So that's why she's a little bit moved over from you.
Wow, N of 1,000, impressive.
Well, we'll see what happens when the data comes in.
Yeah, I mean, it's very different. Kelly, you're doing a primary data collection at your own practice. So that is labor intensive. Rupal is acquiring data from a data warehouse.
Okay.
So that's why she can have an N of 1,000.
Yeah, I like how you said the pilot. Like that's like, oh, that's a nice description.
Yes, right. Okay, so I'm going to speak to both of you. I'm going to give the feedback for both of you, but then I'm going to talk to the other folks who have to watch this on the YouTube channel later. Apparently people actually are watching it or listening to it, so I feel like I'm going to call out to people who are not actually on the call or in the room. So my overall, hey, how's it going? Tiana's here too. I was just people are drifting in, but I was, trying to.
Oh shoot! Sorry.
Yeah, we like to. It's hide the meeting location.
Yeah.
It's a little shell game.
Like, why am I in the wrong building?
All you missed was me asking for any thoughts on when you saw your where you were on the graph fed back to you with me having a circle around it, saying that I agreed.
Mm-hmm.
Any?
No, I think I kind of expected where it was. I wasn't too surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, okay. So then I was also explaining that all the GAP fellows are out, so I'm going to talk to people who are not here or not online, but they've been listening to the YouTube video after, so I want to make sure I call it out to them. So the first feedback point I wanted to make for you today was that and you saw it in the email that I forwarded from the JAMA internal medicine thing, but in general, it is more important to appropriately describe your study than to try and embellish or hide anything. And sometimes I think what was happening was that, it was just uncertain, like people didn't know what vocab to use. It sounded like Kelly, when you have a sample size that's down below 50, it really is in the pilot range, and that is an appropriate adjective to use when you have something of that size. And then for, I think it was Joanna's project, she's trying to compare patients who have selected into a group visit versus ones that stuck with their one-on-one provider visit. And she didn't really highlight that. And then the appropriate adjective was self-selected, because you're obviously comparing two groups that, one clearly had a preference for doing it one way versus the other. You can also, that isn't necessarily a weakness. That can be, so one group had a preference for groups and the other one didn't. What's the difference between these two groups? What about them are different? It's when you're asking a causal question about whether or not group visits are actually effective at whatever our parenting skill is, I think what she was looking at, that it becomes a problem, that it's a self-selected group. Okay, so sometimes I think it was just learning the vocab around how to describe. Deanna, actually for yours, you have 3 locations. And I saw you working very hard to try and say, who this is generalizable. It's like a academically based training program on the coast, either the east or the west. And and then you use the term multi-site.
Yeah, I didn't realize that for 3 is maybe not the right term.
And so can you describe how you came to get those actual 3 sites?
I think it was a lot of convenient sampling, basically, through people I know, and reached out to way more than 3.
Yes, right.
And 3 were able to go through the IRB. Yeah.
Yes. So what you would say is 3 convenience locations.
Oh, okay.
That would be the appropriate way. It's hey,
Okay.
It's more important to show that I recognize that this is not a random sample.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But maybe these are early adopters or somehow working with what the reality of the situation is.
Right.
Okay. And sometimes, if you want to do it to be fully transparent. Hello, who's there? Let them talk. To be fully transparent, you would, if you really had to recruit that way, you would include a response rate.
Right. I still probably will, right?
You will include a response rate both for the site recruitment.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And also for your individuals.
Okay. Oh, interesting. I didn't think about that. Okay.
So this is how fully transparent we like research to be.
Sure.
Yeah. It will, there are strategies around sometimes when you do it this way, it comes back to bite you, like when you get your critiques and stuff like that. So there is definitely positioning and providing rationale that is necessary, but I think there's so much more integrity to having disclosed it.
Sure.
Let me just mention some things for people who are not in the room. So Jackie Shea has been using the National Survey of Children's Health to take a look at immigrant experiences, I think, of the patient-centered medical home, if I remember correctly. And so there's a nationally, so hers is the one in the highest on the y-axis because it's a national sample. But if you read the fine print on that, depending on what year you're looking at, the response rate for that is 25%. And when you look when you look at papers, you'll see people burying that. And to me, that is not good science. It touts itself as a national sample. People slip and think of it as a nationally representative sample, but it is in fact a national well, they did nationally representative, and they end up with a 25% response rate out of all the people they tried to get information from. Yeah. So I think there's still, I think that was only for 1 year, and it might have gotten better after that, but just so you know how far to go with the transparency. All right, so that was, okay. And then I had a comment for Nicole, which she did a community health worker, I believe, at one practice, and I think the question was about how, like, what role that community health worker played, and I have questions for her about, like, are you thinking that they're going to substitute activities for nurses or care managers or whatever? But when she was describing her sample, it's totally okay to say it's an observational sample of patients. It's like, if that's what it was, and that's what it was, it's better to say what it was than to try and pretend it was something better than it really was. All right. Any questions? All right. The next feedback I wanted to give was related to how you make something better. So once you fully acknowledge, like, the weaknesses of your study design on these, I would say, these two major dimensions, it is worth thinking about, like, how do I make it worth it? Even though I'm down here in the lower left-hand corner, am I asking something so novel? I think that everyone thinks that they are, and I have a tendency to believe them. I also have the researcher who's, like, a little bit skeptical about the degree to which it's novel because it's important and we should know about it, or it's novel because it doesn't matter. All right? My goal is to push you guys. So that's the gauntlet I'm throwing out there. But so in terms of ways to try and think about making it better, Rupal is doing something where she's trying to find a comparison group. This goes back to assignment 2 when I say there's always sort of a counterfactual. The secular trend that you are interested, like the issue that you're interested in general also has a secular trend. So if you think that providing housing supports as part of primary care is a good thing, there probably are a bunch of people who are also trying that. So it's good to know whether or not what you're doing is just matching a secular trend in the world or actually delivering something different. Okay, so if you have room to introduce a comparison group, it is usually very helpful for, if your question is, did this, like, how much did this work in terms of an intervention? And most of you are just doing, you are interested in intervention work. That's why it's kind of like has this leading space between quality improvement and intervention. So Kelly, for your project, where it sounds like an intensive and sort of multidisciplinary support approach to housing insecurity that's going on at Martha Elliott. You don't quite have a comparison group. It seems to me that you could, but your solution so far to that problem is to measure your intervention group very intensely. Lots of questions, very frequent questioning. You personally hope, wish, think this works. You have your own investigator bias, but your patients who are coming there are going to have social desirability bias. They're going to want you to prove to you, yes, your intervention worked. So I would just, like, know that, keep that in mind, keep that there's a secular trend in mind, and ask yourself in whether or not it is more important to get a comparison group that you ask the same things of, or versus intensely asking multiple times for this one group. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I guess, one of the questions is, how do we kind of delve into a comparison group when it wasn't part of the original study, and
Yeah,
how to logistically get that done.
yeah. Well, you have medical charts. You don't think you have a sense of who's housing insecure, right? Isn't there standard screening?
Yeah, we do. I guess there's some questions of what do we need to do to look at them? Like, does it have to be part of the original IRB, or
So it should not be an IRB problem if you're using already existing records that you're going to go back and ascertain.
okay.
Okay. Yeah. So that shouldn't be. It might be mechanically difficult to think about it, but you just you don't have to change a thing. Okay. But if I was looking to move out of the lower left-hand corner, one way to do it is to get a comparison group of any kind. Of any kind. It really is helpful. Yeah, if you can know, like, if let's say utilization of healthcare is one of your outcomes. I can't remember if it is or not.
Yeah, we're kind of looking at health cost.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then as long as you're sure that they were housing insecure and didn't participate in this intensive program, you can look at their you have a comparison group for your utilization outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Those are in the medical record.
Yeah.
Just think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Rupal and Joanna, you guys have both mentioned to me either in your abstracts or in our email conversations that you think that whatever is going on at your practices is unique. So Rupal has a primary care clinic that's based in a Head Start program, essentially. And Joanna has someplace where there's EI, early intervention, in-house. This is just an illustration of what I mean, that there's always a secular trend. And you have to know whether or not what you're doing is actually unique and strong enough that you can essentially, quote unquote, beat the secular trend with the intervention. Okay? All right. Deanna, I'm so glad you're here. So you have this. So this is my third and pretty much last feedback point, and then we'll move on to next week's assignment. You have this challenge of you have a desired measure, and you have a proxy. Yeah. Do you want to describe for the group a little bit?
Sure. So I'm trying to look at pediatric residents' experience with end-of-life care and how that affects their moral distress, which is like linked to burnout. But end-of-life care is like kind of difficult to define. So I've been sort of using their exposure to like ICU rotations, oncology, number of like pediatric deaths they've experienced, et cetera. But I don't have, they're all proxy measures. And so this assignment actually made me like really kind of think about that and maybe think that like I should just define my exposure as like maybe ICU exposure, like rather than saying end of life care. And maybe like subsequently like kind of try to tease that out more. Like I don't know. That's what I realized when I was writing that the RAD list. I was like, I was like, this doesn't quite make sense.
So it goes back to like it is what it is, and it's more important to own it for what it really is. You're trying to get so much out of your first project. You know what I mean? It's like, I want to learn data analysis, I want to do this, I want to get a survey, I did multi-site. I mean, you've done so much. It's amazing. But generally, if you have an ideal thing that you want and you have a proxy, you're basically in this situation where you need to get additional data somehow, which sounds infeasible for right now, and there's again so much to learn that it might just be worthwhile asking this question about like time in residency, timing, of ICU experience, thinking about it a little bit more observationally, like what is interesting to know in this space. Both moral distress and burnout, even just levels, are probably of interest to
Right.
the world,
Right.
especially across 3 convenience sites, even though you only have 33% response rate. Like, I think people would still be interested in
Yeah,
that.
there's probably, I feel like the, GME space is kind of thinking about this topic, so hopefully, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all of those. So even just descriptively saying what the prevalences of these things, and maybe there's regional variation, maybe there isn't. How much is there difference by sites?
Right.
There's plenty to analyze in here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. I'll just like kind of simplify things a little bit.
Yeah,
Which will be
totally.
nice.
That would be so nice. And right, because basically you're gonna
Yeah.
look for, okay, so epi is not exactly my space, but the 3 main epi things are like, is there an age effect? So essentially first year, second year, third years.
Right.
Is there a period effect? Like, is it different for people who started, at earlier in time?
Mhm.
And then age
Location? Or,
well, you can do location, and because you only have like 3 years of data, 1 year of data.
it's just cross
Right,
one time
okay,
point,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, so then you would do, instead of doing a time effect, because you don't have that many points in time,
Right.
you could be like, regional or intensity of the program. You probably have some kind of indicator of how the rotations are slightly different between
Yeah.
years. Yeah,
Some
mind
amount
that.
of time and certain things. Okay.
Yeah, mind that a little bit. Okay. Any questions? No? Okay. So I thought that last week's assignment was kind of a doozy. Everybody was like, what? But you all did great. So don't sweat it. This next assignment should be, I think, fun. And I'm just going to quote my stepfather, who was a journalist in Chicago for his entire career. You can see how, like, he just did every job for 20 years for like 4 20-year periods. But he always said, like, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And that is essentially the structure of an abstract. So I know you guys are all going to be like, well, am I supposed to use a percent or like standard deviation, blah, blah, blah. That's not the take home from this week's assignment. This week's assignment is to detect parallelism. Okay? So essentially in your abstract, in your presentation, in your manuscript, there is a point-by-point, one-to-one match between what you introduce as your key topic in your introduction. What you say in your methods are like, okay, so I'm doing burnout. That's the general topic. And I have a Maslach's burnout inventory is the way I measure burnout for this study. And you'll say, like, what is the prevalence of this?
Mhm.
And then the results are Maslach burnout inventory score equals, if it's continuous, you're providing the median or the mean with the standard deviation and the range. If it's categorical, you're giving that frequency distribution. But I'm more interested in you guys being able to spot that it's supposed to be point by point.
Yeah.
Because when someone's reviewing your work, you're setting them up for what they're gonna see. And I usually review abstracts late at night on Saturday with a glass of wine, and nothing makes me more cranky than I'm like, you told me you're going to do this, and this has nothing to do with it. They don't match, okay? And then since some folks are in the middle of designing programs, I would say you should be able to draft your results section even if you don't have results. You have to do some forward visioning in terms of what you're going to say based on what you told me that were going to be in your intro and in your methods. Questions? RuPaul looks like you both look like you're really processing.
The other one was easier.
The other one was easier? The methods?
Yes.
All you have to do is go through here. You can do a practice. So this is Camilla's abstract again. She says examine the prevalence. Okay, so prevalence tells me I'm going to see a percent, right? Prevalence of experiences of racial ethnic discrimination. That's the first thing that's setting me up as a reader. All right, then she comes in the methods and she tells me racial ethnic discrimination and just depressive symptoms, the time points in which they were described. And then she tells me, but you can't see that, where we got the RE discrimination score from. And then she comes in and she tells me that 15% of 5th graders, 22% of 7th graders, and 25% of 10th graders reported RE discrimination. That is point by point through the abstract. And if I did the same, so like if I color coded it, I would be like, okay, all these things are red. And then the second half of what she's telling me are depressive symptoms. So then I'm going to look for, okay, how they measure depressive symptoms in the methods. And then I get down here and then it tells me where the depressive symptoms are. That's what I mean by point by point. Yeah? Okay. That's it.
And then draft our results.
Draft your results. You guys are almost done with writing a full abstract. Can you believe it?
No.
But I don't even know.
It doesn't feel good.
But RuPaul, it's so good for you. It's so good for everyone when you're in the planning stage to actually picture what you're going to, what's the presentation? What are you going to report on? Because it might make you go back and change your objectives or change your methods. Like I'm pushing Kelly right now. You know, are you sure you want to do it this way? And then when you can write out what it is, you'll see if you like it or not. The other thing I put on, somewhere I thought I put it. It was in the email. I gave you a word limit of 150 words for the results section. Most abstracts are 200 or 250. There's no reason to think that you're going to drone on and make me not finish my glass of wine. It takes time to get it that honed, but that is what it needs to be. So I'm just forcing you into that situation early on so that you can write longer and then trim it back as your own coping mechanism, but the target is short. And then you'll realize, oh, I only have a sentence for objectives, and I only have 2 or 3, 4 sentences for methods. Usually the first timer abstracts, it's like a paragraph or a intro. Nope, you just used all your word count. All right. We'll see the homework next week, right? All right.
Yep.
Have a good time.
Thanks, Alina.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Good
much,
seeing you.
Alina.
Yeah, you're welcome. Bye.
Bye.
Right.